Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our weekly chat here at the American Spaces in Uzbekistan, Facebook and YouTube. I'm Gulshan from American Center Tashkent, and I want to thank all for joining and being active participants of our ACT virtual programs. For everyone watching us live, please feel free to type your questions and comments in the chat box, and we will get to them after the presentation. And now, without further ado, let's meet our speaker, Professor Robert Baumann. Hello, Dr. Baumann.
Well, hello. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you so much for being with us today. I want to introduce you to everyone. Professor Dr. Baumann has taught Eurasian and military history for many years at Kansas State University, the University of Kansas, and the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College. Dr. Baumann holds a PhD in history from Yale University and has authored and co-authored 4 books, as well as numerous articles and book chapters. Dr. Baumann, it's our great pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you for taking the time to present and answer our questions. And I can't wait to hear about interesting historical connections between Kansas, Yale University, and Uzbekistan.
All right. Well, thank you, Gulshan. I'll be happy to talk about a few of these things. It occurred to me some time ago that there are some interesting connections historically between Uzbekistan and the United States, and specifically between places I've been and Uzbekistan. My current home is in the state of Kansas, and in the course of the slides, we'll bring up a map that will help people locate Kansas mentally, and also some connections to Yale University, where I did my graduate work and earned my master's degree and my doctoral degree. And these are connections that most people are not aware of. Most people at Yale are not aware of it. Most people at Kansas are not aware of it, and most people in Uzbekistan are not aware of it. But these are real historical connections. So I thought that I would use that to launch my general discussion.
Great.
So if we could go to the next slide, I'll use it to prompt a few thoughts. Okay. Well, let me begin by telling you a little bit about me and how I became interested in this part of the world. And that will lead into the rest of my discussion. I was born in the state of Maryland, but grew up mostly in the state of Wisconsin, which is in the north central part of the United States. And the northern border of the state of Wisconsin is very close to Canada. It borders Lake Superior, which in turn borders Canada to the north. But in any case, I went to get my bachelor's degree at Dartmouth College, which is in the state of New Hampshire. And let me point out, because this is a program about learning English anyway, one of the useful nuances to understand concerns the word college, which has a very different meaning in the United States than it does in Uzbekistan. In the United States, a college and a university are essentially on the same level academically. They are distinguished normally by differences in size, and to some degree by differences in emphasis. So, for example, Dartmouth College, at the time I attended, had an enrollment of 3,000 undergraduate students. And when I was a doctoral student at Yale, Yale had 10,000 students. Yale is known as a university. Dartmouth could easily be known as a university. Everyone knows that in reality, it is a university, but it chooses to be called a college based on its traditions. In any event, while I was doing my undergraduate work at Dartmouth, I was taking courses in the Russian language, and Dartmouth had a program, a direct exchange, with what was then known as Leningrad State University. Today it's known as St. Petersburg University in St. Petersburg, Russia. And so I went for a term to study at Leningrad State University and had a very interesting experience during that visit. And that really got me interested in this part of the world. The Soviet Union was a fascinating place that, of course, at that time encompassed Uzbekistan. And so that's, in many respects, where this story starts. So in 1972, I went on that exchange program. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, well, this is a relatively recent photograph from Dartmouth. There I am with my grandson, Alexander. We attended an American football game between Dartmouth and Yale, and Dartmouth was the host for this game. As some of you may know, sports events are very popular and a very big deal at American colleges and universities. That is something else that sets American colleges and universities apart from most of those in the rest of the world, is that there's such a high level of interest in sports. And every college and university has teams that represent it in various sports, and there are traditional rivalries and so on and so forth. So they draw huge crowds often. Many games are on television, and there's lots of general interest. So next slide. This is near Dartmouth with two of my grandchildren. Dartmouth is nestled in the White Mountains of the state of New Hampshire. And so a very short distance from the college campus, you can travel and see some really spectacular scenery, especially in the fall, above all in October, when the leaves turn bright colors on the trees and the hillsides are covered in gorgeous shades of yellow and orange and red, in addition to the usual green. Next slide, please. So on to Yale University, where again I did my what we call graduate work, which is or postgraduate work that is study that is done beyond the bachelor's degree is called graduate work normally. And so I spent some great years at Yale doing my master's and doctoral study and research. While I was at Yale as a doctoral student, I became aware of the fact that one of Yale's most famous early graduates was a man by the name of Eugene Schuyler. And he has an interesting story that connects to Uzbekistan. Before we go to that point, this is a photograph of me in Kansas, a few miles from my home, enjoying a hike in the fall in the woods. You can see that the leaves have already fallen off of the trees, and they're brown, and they're scattered all over the ground. It was a beautiful day with sunshine for a long walk, which is something that I enjoy. Let's go on to the next slide. Well, in 2016, 2017, 4 years ago, I had the opportunity to come to Tashkent to work and teach for a year. And while I was here, I took advantage of my presence in order to tour around the country of Uzbekistan and see various places. I imagine many of you will recognize the photograph that was on the right. That was taken at Khiva, and I'm standing there with my younger son, who was a university student at the time, but took time off from his university studies to spend a semester with me in Uzbekistan. And while he was here, he wrote his history thesis for his bachelor's degree. That thesis was about the exploits of Alexander the Great during his travels and military campaigns through Uzbekistan. So that gave us a good reason to travel around the country. And one of the reasons that this is somewhat of interest was that, in fact, there's an old Yale connection to Uzbekistan involving Eugene Schuyler that compares a little bit to my experiences. So we'll tell you about it. On to the next slide, please. Well, one thing first. This is one of the books that I published about 20 odd years ago. It includes a chapter about Central Asia, actually several chapters about Central Asia during the period of the Russian colonial rule of Central Asia and Uzbekistan, and subsequently the period of the Russian Civil War and the early Soviet period of history in Uzbekistan, all of which was extremely interesting to me and is something that I did lots and lots of research on. Next slide. Okay, back to Eugene Schuyler at long last. Interestingly enough, and this fascinated me when I first discovered it years ago, Eugene Schuyler was one of 3 doctoral students at Yale who in the year 1861, which is now 160 years ago, became the first 3 Americans ever to earn a doctoral degree in the United States at an American university. So, put another way, Yale University was the first American university to grant doctoral degrees, and Eugene Schuyler was one of the very first 3 to earn that degree. Now, that's interesting. In addition, because during the course of his career, Eugene Schuyler became an American diplomat whose first and primary assignment was as a member of the American Diplomatic Corps in the Russian Empire. While he was in the Russian Empire, he took it upon himself to get around and explore the country. He got permission to travel to Central Asia and had some fascinating experiences touring around what in the future, of course, would be the country of Uzbekistan. He was completely fascinated by the country. Eugene Schuyler was a very serious student of whatever culture he was in. While he was in the Russian Empire, he made it his business to become fluent in the Russian language and actually became the primary translator of some important Russian novels from the period. So he was a very serious linguist, in addition to a diplomat and a traveler, and as we'll see, a historian and social commentator. Next slide, please. Okay, here is a photograph of Eugene Schuyler, along with a set of his 2-volume book called Turkistan, which was the name by which the Russian Empire referred to what we now call Central Asia, which again includes Uzbekistan. Schuyler wrote that book upon his return to the United States, and it was published in 2 volumes in the year 1876. In that book, he describes visits to Tashkent, to Bukhara, to Khiva, Samarkand. He talks about the people he met. He had a brief meeting with the then Governor General or Viceroy of Turkestan, who is in effect the governor of Turkestan for the Russian Empire. This was General von Kaufmann, who many of you have probably heard of, who was sent to Tashkent by the Tsar, by Tsar Alexander Alexander II, to administer this new region of the Russian Empire. So Schuyler's book became very popular, was widely read. For Americans, it was incredibly interesting because virtually no Americans had ever been to this part of the world. And so Eugene Schuyler was something of an explorer from an American point of view, and the first person to give Americans a portrait of what Central Asia, and again, the future state of Uzbekistan, were like at that time. It's also interesting to note that this book on Turkestan is still of interest today, and copies are still sold in many places. Much to my surprise, a few months ago, while I was shopping in Tashkent, in a store that had a small book section, I found a copy of Schuyler's book for sale here in Tashkent, and it was in the Uzbek language. So it's now available in at least 3 versions: an English version, a Russian version, and an Uzbek version, so that those who want it can find it and read it. So again, the story of Eugene Schuyler's adventures was of great interest to me because I too was interested in Central Asia from the time of my first visit to the Soviet Union many years ago while I was a student at Dartmouth. My first visit to Central Asia and to Tashkent was in the year 1979, which is quite a few years ago, 32 years ago, as a matter of fact. And I can still remember very vividly what that visit was like. It was fascinating, and of course, the city looked quite a bit different then from the way it does now. Tashkent in 1979 was still recovering, in fact, from the earthquake of 1966. But there were lots of new buildings, and I stayed in one of the new hotels, which is now an old hotel in Tashkent during that trip. I also got to Samarkand and Khiva during that trip through Uzbekistan, and found it completely interesting. So I've always felt a certain kinship, you might say, with Eugene Schuyler, because we shared this interest in Central Asia. And like Eugene Schuyler, I've had the opportunity to publish some writings about the history of Uzbekistan and Central Asia, and places I've visited, and the culture, and so on. So this again has always been a big interest of mine, and something I've enjoyed. And that's also one of the reasons that I took the opportunity to return to Uzbekistan this year, and I'll have the opportunity to be here for still more than a year, doing historical research and doing some teaching and giving some lectures and things of that sort. So I enjoy it here very much. Next slide. Okay, well, I also mentioned that there were some connections to the state of Kansas, however unlikely that might seem at first glance. Now, what I have here is a slide showing you the official seal of the state of Kansas. Every state, every country has a national emblem of some kind, and that's the official seal of the state of Kansas. On that seal, you can see the stars, the mountains off in the west, the Missouri River, the pioneer wagon trains, a farmer at work. This is all part of the historical tradition of the state of Kansas. Now, on the map on the right, you get some sense of the road network and where the major cities are. Most of the population of Kansas is located in the northeast portion of the state. Kansas City, the biggest city in the state, is located on the border with Missouri, which also has a Kansas City of its own. As you move west from there, the state becomes less and less densely populated. In any case, about in the middle of the state of Kansas is a little city called Newton, Kansas, and that's the place I'm going to talk about. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. Just again, so you understand locations here, here's a big map of the United States. If you look at it closely, you will see the state of Kansas approximately in the middle of what we call the continental United States. They call it continental United States because these are all the states, the 48 states that are together in North America. There are, of course, 2 additional states, Hawaii, which is a series of islands out in the Pacific Ocean, and Alaska, which is much farther to the north and is separated from the other states by Canada. But in any case, if you look at the state of Kansas on that map, and if you look at about the central point in the state of Kansas, you have an idea of where Newton is located. So next slide. Okay, so here's the story. Newton, Kansas was populated 140 years ago or so by Mennonite Christians who had emigrated to Kansas from the Russian Empire. The story, however, of the Mennonite Christians runs through Central Asia. In 1874, the Russian Empire, for the first time, introduced universal military service. The Mennonite Christians, who were pacifists, had always been freed from the obligation to perform military service. They had been invited to the Russian Empire. Most of them emigrated from Switzerland or Holland. They'd been invited to the Russian Empire to emigrate and become farmers because they had reputation in Europe for being very skilled and accomplished farmers. And so everything was fine for a while. But with the introduction of universal military service, it became apparent that soon the Mennonites would be required to perform military service like all other male citizens of the Russian Empire. Because they were pacifists, they did not want to perform military service. The Russian Empire offered a compromise solution, which was to put them at work in non-combat related occupations, such as managing forests and things like that. But the leaders of the Mennonites were concerned and felt that it was best to try to avoid service altogether. So the reason they go to Central Asia is that for a while, immigrants from Russia into Central Asia were free from the obligation of military service. So it was attractive to the Mennonites to go to Central Asia. And some of them looked around for places to live. They passed through Tashkent, but ultimately a significant group settled in the area of Khiva, where the Khan welcomed them, and they even were able to establish a small community outside the main city in Khiva. And that was fine, but eventually a number of them decided to emigrate to the United States and to find open farmland that was like the area that they had left behind in Russia. And so they ended up emigrating to Kansas, of all places. And so today, there is still a significant Mennonite tradition and a Mennonite community in and around central Kansas in the community of Newton. So this is my point about an interesting and unlikely and little known connection between Kansas and Central Asia. Next slide, please. All right, and one of the emblems of that lasting connection is Bethel College. Now, we started this program talking a little bit about colleges and the differences between a college and a university. Bethel College, located in North Newton, Kansas, is a Mennonite college. It was, in fact, established in the 1880s as America's first Mennonite college. That is the first college established by the Mennonite religious community, and with an emphasis on the Mennonite religious tradition in its teachings. Today, Bethel College is still a thriving, if very small, institution. I mentioned that one common difference between colleges and universities is in size. Bethel College, last time I checked, had an enrollment of around 500 students. So it's not very large, but it still is doing very well. And it, like other colleges and schools, has its own sports teams to represent it, and so on and so on. So it's in a very pretty picturesque part of Kansas. And in fact, Bethel College still tries to attract an international enrollment as well as students from around the United States. And so it is known as a national college, which means that its students come not only from the immediate area where it's located, but from around the country. So there is the story of Bethel College. And incidentally, in its library, Bethel College has an archive of some of the original papers and letters and whatnot written by Mennonite immigrants to Kansas. And so the records of their journey through Central Asia and to the United States are held there in the library at Bethel College in Kansas. Next slide. Just a couple of notes here as we reach towards the end of this conversation, at which point I'll be happy to take questions. What you see there is a picture from the Veterans Day parade in New York City a couple of years ago. Veterans Day, normally held on November 11th in the United States, commemorates the end of the First World War, and has since become a general day for Americans to honor the veterans of all of its armed services who have served overseas during America's various wars in history. Where I'm from in Kansas, every year also, there's a Veterans Day Parade. The Veterans Day Parade in New York City is known as America's biggest Veterans Day Parade. The second biggest one is in Leavenworth, Kansas, where I have lived and worked for many years. Next slide. Yes, and there's my son and his wife touring New York City sometime after we saw that parade for Veterans Day in New York City. So that ends the substance of my talk about the United States, about connections between Kansas, the United States, and Uzbekistan. There, in fact, is a photograph of me taken just a couple of months ago in the countryside, not so far out of Tashkent. I will call to your attention that I'm wearing a baseball cap, and I have it with me right now. This is the cap of my favorite American professional baseball team, the Baltimore Orioles, who are enduring a difficult season, but at least did manage to win a very exciting game yesterday against the New York Yankees. So I'm in a good mood today. So with that, we can conclude this, and I'll be happy to entertain questions about any subjects that you might have. And here I am walking around Uzbekistan with my other son in the background, New York City. But anyway, happy to take questions at this point. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Baumann. That was so interesting. You shared the connections that we would never guess that Uzbekistan and the United States have. So we do have several questions.
Great.
Dania Hasanova is saying, thank you, Dr. Baumann, for the interesting presentation. What place or site in Uzbekistan impressed you most?
Well, many things in Uzbekistan have impressed me. It's a beautiful country, and I certainly enjoy Tashkent, and I've been to the Fergana Valley and Bukhara and Samarkand and Khiva. I think my strongest impressions are probably from Khiva, simply because the museum city there, if you now is like walking back into the past, and for a historian, that's a lot of fun. So certainly I enjoy Khiva very much, but I have been to Samarkand, I think 4 times, and thoroughly enjoy it. And been to Bukhara twice, and of course I've spent the most time by far in Tashkent, and I enjoy walking around the city, traveling by the metro and meeting people and so on and so forth. I want to emphasize this. In my time in Uzbekistan, the people have been extremely friendly. Everyone I think I've ever met has been friendly. I thoroughly enjoy my conversations with citizens of Uzbekistan. And I have actually been trying to study the Uzbek language a little bit, making a little bit of progress, I'm happy to say, but I have some work yet to do.
It's hard not to be friendly with a person like you. We have another question from Tuchenka. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing the name correctly. Mm-hmm. Did you like your journey? Do you want to come back again? And
yes.
What similarity did you find in the US and Uzbekistan?
Interesting. Well, let me start with the last part. Similarities. I think that Americans and Uzbeks alike are very friendly and hospitable, welcoming to visitors, and are eager to be helpful. So that's a striking thing. The people often ask me to compare the weather in Kansas with the weather in Tashkent? That comes up a lot, and so I have an answer in mind when that question arises. Obviously, in say July, the absolute temperature in Tashkent is hotter than anywhere in Kansas. When it gets above 40 degrees, that's some really hot weather, and it very seldom gets that hot in Kansas. On the other hand, on many summer days, the weather in Kansas, though it's not quite as hot, can be actually more uncomfortable because the humidity, the влажность, in Kansas is higher than in Tashkent. So a day when it's only, say, 35 degrees in Kansas can be more uncomfortable than a 40-degree day in Tashkent because of the humidity. You will be perspiring and your shirt will be soaking wet, and it becomes quite uncomfortable. That's especially true where I live, which is right near the Missouri River, which is one of America's biggest rivers. And so the humidity tends to be pretty high. Again, much higher than in Tashkent. As for the winters, they're rather similar. The winters are not long in Tashkent or in Kansas. I think on the whole, winter is a little bit colder in Kansas within the range of my limited experience. I've only spent 2 winters in Tashkent, so I can't say categorically that it's always colder in Kansas. But Kansas has, although the winters are similar on many days, there are periods in Kansas when it is really, really cold, when it's cold like in Moscow. And I don't think that happens very much in Tashkent. So there are some differences in the weather, but the climate is not that different on the whole. So I do enjoy Uzbekistan. I have every intention of coming back again and again in the future, although again, I'll be here for a while. I'm not leaving anytime soon. But when I come back next time, I hope I'll have one or more of my grandchildren with me. They'll be old enough to travel by then, so that could be fun.
That's great. Thank you. Our next comment/question from Nargiza Fadulaeva. She said she's very pleased to communicate with a person from Kansas. When they say Kansas, she always thinks of Oz and the girl from Kansas. Are there really such strong hurricanes?
Well, I'm so glad, Nargiza, I'm so glad that you asked that question because I really should mention the story of the Wizard of Oz, which takes place in Kansas, according to the story. And of course, that famous girl from Kansas by the name of Dorothy is the heroine of the famous movie The Wizard of Oz, Волшебник Оза. And that is one of the America's most favorite stories among children. And of course, the movie is very famous. My children and grandchildren all loved that movie, The Wizard of Oz. As for that storm, technically it wasn't what we would call a hurricane. It was a tornado. And if you go back and check the movie, you'll see that it was a tornado. It has that spiral cloud, and I have been near some tornadoes in my lifetime, and the winds are extremely strong. Fortunately, I personally have never been in a place where a tornado did some really serious destruction. But in the last 10 years, there have been 2 tornadoes not so far from where I live that have killed people. Actually, a small town in Kansas was much of it was destroyed by a tornado, and I think there were 5 or 10 people who were killed. And there was another case not so far away across the state border in Missouri. So, in extreme cases, they can be very, very severe. And so that is something that we are familiar with in Kansas, and some other parts of the central United States have tornadoes as well. Hurricanes normally happen along the coast. So the big hurricane that happened recently, Ida, that hit the Gulf Coast around Louisiana, and also caused tremendous rainstorms around New York and places like that. That was a hurricane. They also have very strong winds, but they tend to happen where there is water. They tend to come from the ocean and hit land. Tornadoes start over land, and tornadoes are normally very small compared to a hurricane. A hurricane can be hundreds of miles across, whereas a big tornado might be a mile across, but it creates tremendous winds, and wherever that funnel goes, it tends to destroy things in its path. So it will pick up cars and throw them. It will pick up trees. It will destroy houses or buildings. Most people who live in Kansas, when they hear there's going to be a tornado, they go to the basement, the floor below ground, podval, in their house, so to be safer from the tornado. The worst thing you can do during a tornado is to be driving in your car, because tornadoes pick cars right up into the air and throw them someplace. And so that's a very dangerous scenario. I'm glad you brought up the Wizard of Oz, and indeed tornadoes are a real thing.
Thank you. Milana Star is asking, please tell us about negative sides of Uzbekistan that you have faced.
Negative sides of Uzbekistan. I'm trying to think of negatives, because my experience has been pretty positive. Again, the hottest weather is pretty strong, and I must say the summer here is very, very long, as I'm experiencing right now. Today was still a very hot day, and in the office where I work and in the building where I teach, I shut off the air conditioning by now, so it's pretty hot working in that office now. Anytime you go to a foreign country, you have to get used to the fact that there are differences. And these are simply things that you have to learn about and figure out how to manage. It's been a little surprising to me how many traffic jams there are in Tashkent, the Probki. Many mornings when I ride to work, there are some significant delays, and because there's no metro station close to my house, I don't save any time by trying to go to the metro and do it. And it's probably my fault. I've never really learned to use the bus system in Tashkent, so that's probably that's my fault, and I need to learn to do that. Otherwise, in terms of adjusting, if you're from another country, one of the things that you adjust to is things like drinking the local water, because the local water sometimes has minerals or bacteria in it that your system is not used to, because you haven't been exposed to them your whole life. So you tend to be a little bit careful, and most of the water I drink is from bottles and things like that. but mostly I'm having good experiences here. So,
thank you. Amin Polatov is asking, what kind of aspects in Uzbekistan you wish to develop? I mean, which aspects of life require an improvement? Thank you for your answer.
Oh, wow, there's so much to this. Well, I guess picking up where I left off, I think a challenge for Tashkent is going to be expanding its road network to make it easier to drive across the city, because it's clear that the number of automobiles in Tashkent is rapidly growing. It's growing faster than the road system, and a road system that was perfectly adequate 10 years ago is now not able to handle the amount of traffic that it has. So I think for many people in Tashkent, the rapidly increasing number of cars is going to pose significant challenges, and it may also require further expansion of the metro system and possible expansion of the bus network, because Tashkent is a growing place, and that's an infrastructure challenge that the city will face.
Mhm.
What other interesting things might we work on here? I'm used to reading newspapers every day, and I don't see so many newspapers here in Tashkent. And of course, I need to read Uzbek in order to be able to read more newspapers. So it's hard for me to judge but I think in our fast-moving world where things are more and more global, being able to have access to up-to-date information and to being able to communicate is very important. So I think Tashkent and Uzbekistan in general will probably benefit greatly as more people are able to get access to the internet and computers and whatnot. That's also very important for educational opportunity in schools. So I think there's some room for progress there. I see another area, now, since we're in a pandemic and everyone in the world is struggling with that. I think we now can see why the opportunities that Uzbekistan now has to work cooperatively with some of the pharmaceutical companies from other countries, whether it's the United States or China or the United Kingdom or whatnot, or India, will be beneficial because it's becoming more and more apparent that countries that have their own pharmaceutical industry have an advantage in terms of rapid development and distribution of vaccines, for example. So there are lots of things that could be done. Because Uzbekistan is still such a young country, there's lots of room for growth, and there's room for improvement. I think there has been progress. Again, since I was first here, 42 years ago, the progress has been quite amazing. We tend to think of the United States as a very young country, and yet the United States is not very far from celebrating its 250th anniversary. So it's all a relative thing. The United States is young compared to, say, Russia, but it's an old country compared to Uzbekistan.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. I think next question is something I should answer from Amin Polatov. He's asking, so the consular section is starting giving visas from October 1st. Can we visit ACT from October? I don't think so. We are not expecting to receive any in-person visit so far, but once situation gets better with COVID, we'll let you know through our social media once we are open. But thank you for your question, Amir. Next question from Tuchanka. What can you recommend to people who want to come to Uzbekistan?
Well, because I'm so interested in history, I recommend that they visit the historical sites. That's one of the most interesting aspects of Uzbekistan. But what I would recommend to people who plan to travel here is that they educate themselves a little bit before they come so that they can really enjoy it and take advantage of it while they're here. Visiting another country is much more interesting if you have taken a little bit of time to prepare and to learn about it and to maybe learn a few words and phrases and whatnot to help you communicate. All of that can be very beneficial when you're traveling in another country.
Thank you so much. Danya is asking, you shared amazing historical facts about our country. What made you get interested in Central Asia's history and learn it thoroughly?
Well, there are many reasons it interested me. One of them, of course, is that you have fascinating history in Central Asia that goes back many centuries. And being from a young country, Central Asian history going back to Amir Timur or even centuries before that is of great interest. And there's the history of the Silk Road and whatnot. All of that fascinated me. If you look at the globe, Kansas and Uzbekistan are almost on opposite sides of the globe. The time difference right now between Kansas and Tashkent is 10 hours. After we go through the fall time adjustment in Kansas, it'll be 11 hours. And what that tells you is that we are almost perfectly on opposite sides of the world. So because of that great distance, Central Asia always seemed like a fascinating and exotic and interesting place to me. And it's still a little bit exotic, but of course, once you get to know the people, it's less exotic. You realize that Uzbeks and Americans have a great deal in common. We're very, very much alike, despite certain historical and cultural differences. And of course, these days, again, it's a smaller world. We have Uzbeks living in the United States. We have lots of Americans visiting Uzbekistan. In a couple of American cities now, we even have Uzbek restaurants. Again, the cultural impact going in both directions is significant.
Thank you so much. Nargis Suleiman Khanalieva is asking, what is the most mouth-watering Uzbek meal you have tried?
I enjoy Uzbek food. I enjoy the plov very much, and in all its varieties, in all its local variations. I enjoy lagman, manti, somsa. It's all good, and again, it comes in interesting local varieties that are fun. I did have a chance to go to Shahrisabz a few years ago, but I planned to go back because it was a very short visit. I only got to spend about half a day. So I do hope to go back and see it sometime.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Tuchan Khan is asking, did you learn any Uzbek words? If yes, can you tell us something?
What Siznika Ganimdan Hursandman.
Wow.
Yeah. So I've been working on a few words and phrases, Salom, Rahmat, and so on, Assalamu alaikum, and whatnot. I enjoyed it. And it's good to learn Uzbek, and it's good to try to read it a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Asror Burhanov is asking, what are your success habits? What mistakes have you made along the way? What was the hardest decision you have ever had to make?
Oh my, that's an interesting series of questions. I'll try to be brief with the answers. I think the key to success is in most fields of endeavor, whether it's sports or learning languages or studying history or studying mathematics, is persistence. You have to learn to keep working at something. Very few of us have such extreme talent that we are instantly good at something. We generally have to work at it, and you have to develop the habits of mind to continue to work at it regularly, and that requires a little bit of self-discipline. You simply have to tell yourself, I must do this. And so to this day, for example, I still go running about four times a week. Here in Tashkent, I run about 25 kilometers a week. So I do that to maintain my habit of physical fitness, for example. Mistakes along the way, generally mistakes come from making a decision without thinking about it, or from not making a decision at all. One of the worst habits, I talked about what's necessary for success and persistence. Probably the greatest source of lack of success is procrastination. That's a long word. It's a long English word. Procrastination. If you don't know it, you should learn it. Procrastination is also a habit, and that is where you keep coming up with reasons not to do something that you need to do. And so, for example, when I had to write my doctoral dissertation, it's a long, study based on research that takes typically several years to complete. You have to be persistent, disciplined, and work on it all the time. The greatest enemy of success is procrastination. The feeling that, well, I don't need to work on it today. I'll work on it tomorrow or the next day. That is a formula for failure because it leads you to a mindset where you're constantly pushing it a short distance into the future so that you can do something else that's more fun right now. And so that's the probably your greatest risk. Well, the hardest decision I ever had to make, I suppose, was choosing a career, and I chose to get into academic life and to study history and get a PhD and teach and do research and whatnot. I had thought about other possibilities, but at some point you have to choose something, and as I said, you can't procrastinate forever. At some point, you've got to make a choice, and so I did.
Thank you so much. Amin Polatov is asking to express Uzbekistan in 3 words based on your journey.
3 words, okay. History, friendly, and hot would be the first 3 words that come to mind.
Wonderful. Michael Portillo is asking, what similarities do you see between Uzbekistan and the US? Any similarities specific to the Midwest?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, there's, in terms of the climate, I think there's a lot of similarity to Kansas. Of course, the United States, being such a large country, has many different climatic zones, so that in the north, the weather is a lot like Moscow, and in the deep south and places like Florida, the weather is more like the tropics in the Caribbean. But in the Midwest, we have weather that's not so different from Tashkent. We have all 4 seasons. We have, summer, fall, winter, and spring, and they're all different and they're distinct. So we have hot weather, we have snow, we have ice, and all of that. So that's pretty similar. The United States has deserts like Uzbekistan has, and steppe area. Kansas is considered sort of the equivalent of the American steppe. And indeed, west of where I live, the prairie is wide open and you don't see many trees and the land is very flat. Farther to our west, we have mountains that are not so different from the mountains you would see around here. Or in the Northeast, early in my presentation, I showed a picture from near Dartmouth, and you saw mountains there that are not so different from the mountains a few miles away in the area of Chimgan and so on. So those are some of the things that come to mind.
Thank you so much. Lola Uzakova is asking, have you noticed any similarities in history of the US and Uzbekistan?
There aren't that many similarities. You have to look pretty hard. Again, we have some connections, but the historical traditions are very different, and that's one of the things that makes Uzbekistan so interesting for me. If it was extremely similar, it would not be as much fun, and so it's the differences that I really enjoy.
Okay. I think we have to wrap up.
Yeah.
We had so many interesting questions, and I want to thank all our viewers for being with us and for being active and asking all those questions. And of course, Dr. Baumann, thank you so much for
it's been my pleasure.
This evening with us and telling us about these connections between our countries and answering all our questions.
Well, thank you very much, and I look forward to doing it again sometime.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye.